A large container ship entered a busy traffic area in Asia. It was early morning on a clear day. At 6:30, the master came to the bridge, although he had not been called. He took over from the chief officer and put the lookout on the wheel. The voyage plan was very basic, showing only the intended track. Contrary to company procedures, the frequency of position fixing was not defined, and no-go areas were not marked. The local vessel traffic service asked the ship to slow down. The engine telegraph was put to half ahead. But the engine remained at full speed, and the ship did not slow down. Neither the master nor the chief officer realized this, although it was observable on the instruments and the ECDIS and ARPA displays. The ship entered the heavy traffic area at 20 knots. The VTS notified the ship of 3 vessels that were on potential collision courses. The master misunderstood which targets the VTS was referring to. The VTS requested the ship to slow down several times. This annoyed both the master and chief officer. From now on, they immediately acknowledged calls from the VTS, but did not listen to them. To deal with one of the targets, the master brought the ship to starboard, correctly following colregs. The master did all the navigation based on the displayed true vectors. The situation proved difficult to resolve. The master slowed down and came further to starboard. He intended to turn to port after passing the stern of the approaching ship. The ship was now well off track, but the master was calm and confident. Neither the helmsman nor the chief officer said anything. In spite of further warnings from the VTS, the ship ran hard aground at 14 knots. There were no injuries, but substantial and costly damage to the ship, which was put out of service for a considerable time. Bridge watchkeeping is one of the most important jobs on board a ship at sea. Under the STCW Convention, the watchkeeping officer is the master's representative and is responsible for the safety and security of the ship and all those on board. It's critical work, as over 80% of insured losses due to collision, grounding and contact damage are said to arise from human error. The watchkeeping officer must ensure that the ship never runs aground, nor has a collision. This means always knowing the ship's situation and keeping a good lookout. This task requires good training, a high standard of skills, and effective time management. How this can be best achieved is the subject of this video.
Captain.
Good morning. You're the new Chief Officer?
Nice to meet you.
Welcome on board the OCL.
Good preparation is essential to good bridge watchkeeping.
Also, you'll have to go through all the bridge equipment with the second officer. We have a checklist for that. I have one here ready for you.
After they've introduced themselves to the master and had their familiarization tour, replacement deck officers need to find out about the ship's navigational equipment and maneuvering characteristics.
Once you're happy with all this, if you have any questions, just ask the second mate. He'll be able to fill you in on all the details.
Perfect.
This is a requirement under ISM. You must go around the bridge with the navigating officer. If that's not possible, You must do this with the master. You need to be certain you are familiar with the navigational equipment and the master's standing orders before you take a watch. As well as the target tracking equipment, be sure that you know how to operate the echo sounder. Ask about the ship's manoeuvring characteristics.
So this is the main selector for,
main selector, exactly.
Okay, it's not on the console.
No, the console, you are here.
Find out how to operate the engine when the ship is working UMS. Officers need to understand the operational limitations of the ship's propulsion and steering systems. Last but not least, officers must have a good understanding of the collision regulations.
Who should give the way if there's chance for a close encounter?
You must give us way. Because
They must know how to apply them and must obey them in all traffic situations. The right way to start a watch is to get up on the bridge early. This is especially important at night, when your eyes will need at least 10 minutes to adjust to the darkness. You should examine the intended track of the ship for the length of your watch. A close look will tell you what dangers to look out for. Look out the window. Study and assess the situation. Is there any traffic? Is adverse weather forecast for the watch? Is there a lookout or helmsman on the bridge? If officers think the manning level is not appropriate for their watch, then extra personnel must be called. The handing over watchkeeper should give an assessment of the navigational situation, indicating any traffic that could be a threat.
Situation, we are approaching the Southampton area. In front of us, small coasters and fishing vessels. A few of them.
The officer must point out the systems being used and any faults or errors. Watch handover must never take place during a planned manoeuvre or during a collision avoidance manoeuvre. Relieving watchkeepers must be told whether the steering is set for manual or automatic, the course being steered, and the compass error. They must be told about the engine settings and whether the engine room is manned. During the handover, the relieving officer needs to check that all the navigational equipment is functioning correctly. The outgoing watchkeeper must be certain that the relieving watchkeeper is fit for duty. If not, the master must be called. The relieving officer must check the setup of the target tracking equipment and the inputs to them. If the ship is using electronic charts, either for primary navigation or for backup, then these settings need to be checked. The gyro compass, its repeaters, and the magnetic compass are checked and compared. When both watchkeepers are satisfied that everything is as it should be, then the relieving officer takes over. The handover should be done formally by saying, "You now have the watch," or words to that effect, which will be recorded by the voyage data recorder.
You ready to take the con? I'll take the con. Okay, thank you.
The officer needs to know the circumstances when the master must be called. If the watchkeeper has doubts about the ship's situation, the master should be called. A good general rule is, if you're thinking about calling the master, you should call him. That's the end of this section. Now look at the workbook. The foundation of safe watchkeeping is keeping to the voyage plan, whether it is on the chart or on an ecdis. The voyage plan will show the track to navigate. It will indicate the safe speed and alter course positions. It will show safety margins and no-go areas. It will set out how often the ship's position needs to be fixed and how this should be done.
Kevin, so
Remember that the voyage plan has been approved by the master.
Also, on your Foxtrot,
The navigation of the ship is the master's responsibility, which is delegated to the watchkeeping officer only within the limits set by the master's standing orders.
staying in on this.
If keeping to the intended track is becoming difficult, call the master. Watchkeeping officers should never be afraid of calling the master. The voyage plan will indicate many of the potential dangers expected on the route. But to be able to react quickly and appropriately to unexpected hazards, the officer on the bridge needs to have a complete understanding of the ship's situation. Good situational awareness is essential to avoid navigating the ship into danger. This means recognizing and responding to what is going on around the ship. To do this, the watchkeeper must continually evaluate information about the threats to the ship. Let's look at what the watchkeeping officer needs to consider. First of all, there is the navigational situation. From the voyage plan, the officer will know the intended track of the ship. But how close is the ship to that? How does the planned speed over the ground compare to the actual speed over the ground? There's the surrounding environment. How much water is there underneath the keel? Will tidal stream affect the course? What about the wind? Will this cause any problems? What about the floating hazards? The target tracking systems will be a major contributor to the officer's knowledge. But this must be supplemented by visual observation of these threats, both by the officer and the lookouts. Which targets present a risk of collision? What are those ships likely to do next? And, keeping strictly to the coal regs, what options are there? How is the traffic situation in general? Is it getting busier? What's happening on the VHF? The officer should use all the equipment on the bridge to help monitor these hazards. But sometimes these systems can themselves go wrong. A good watchkeeper will always be seeking to confirm the integrity of the electronic navigational aids. Always cross-check electronic positions with the results of alternative position fixing methods. Then there is the possibility of mechanical problems on the ship. A good watchkeeper will always be aware of the contingency planning in case of engine failure. Where would the ship go if this happened? The watchkeeping officer will need to talk to the duty engineer. If the ship is running UMS, they need to be aware of the propulsion unit's limitations. Watchkeeping officers should remember that they and the engineering department are all part of one team. Watchkeeping officers must keep an overall view. For good situational awareness, they need to balance the time they spend on the charts, on the electronic navigational aids, and looking at the surroundings. They need to compare and contrast the information they get from electronic equipment, the charts, and their eyes and ears. Safe navigation takes priority over all other operations on board. Proper manning of the bridge is essential to safe navigation. If the situation changes, or if the workload increases so that the officer cannot maintain an effective lookout, then the officer must call for assistance as per the master's standing orders. Remember, it's much better to get assistance early than to endanger the ship. Don't delay getting help, either by overconfidence or through fear of being accused of overreacting. Make sure all lookouts are properly briefed. Instructions should be given about what landmarks, lights and buoys to look out for, in addition to watching for other ships. Officers must remember that the bridge must not be left unattended at any time. Watchkeeping officers must avoid distractions. Do not use mobile phones, laptops or MP3 players. Never read books or magazines during a watch. They need to keep their full attention on their primary task, safe navigation of the ship. The voyage plan will indicate the method and frequency required for position fixing based on company procedures. Deep sea, this is likely to be by satellite navigation systems. These positions are normally accurate, but it's important to cross-check them with alternative methods. In deep sea, the good watchkeeping officer will occasionally take a celestial sight by sextant. It provides a valuable check and helps to maintain the skills. In coastal waters, where the position of the ship is more critical, both visual and radar position fixing will become essential to cross-check the accuracy of the position. There must be no risk of the ship getting into danger between fixes. The passage plan will indicate where parallel indexing should be used. This is very useful in confined waters and in poor visibility. The track of a radar conspicuous point is drawn on a relative motion radar display. The offset of the track is the distance the ship needs to keep off the point. All watchkeeping officers need to be thoroughly familiar with parallel indexing. Using this technique never replaces regular plotting of the ship's position.
A distress call has been heard by an aircraft on channel 16.
Watchkeeping officers have a responsibility for keeping a radio watch. It also improves situational awareness. Listen out for any traffic as well as navigational warnings. When time is available, the watchkeeping officer needs to carry out a number of routine monitoring tasks. These must include, but are not limited to, fire alarms, ballast control apparatus, telecommunications, and watertight integrity monitoring equipment. Other items will include checking the compass error and scrutinizing other navigational equipment for error. Officers should try to avoid close-quarter situations, but occasionally the unexpected happens. If you have good situational awareness, you will be well placed to respond. All ships must be navigated according to the coal regs, but officers cannot rely on other ships doing the right thing. Never risk the safety of your ship on that assumption.
260.
260.
If you can, take positive action early. If a ship is tracking you, they will notice a clear change in course. Slowing down is an option, and officers should not hesitate to do this. It gives more time. Where possible, give the engineering department sufficient warning. Remember, it will take several minutes for the change to register on the other ship's target tracking equipment. Try to think ahead. Ask yourself, where is that echo going? What might it do next? What are my options? Collision avoidance is best done by visual observation, cross-checked on the ARPA or target tracking equipment. ECDIS and ARPA equipment can help your situational awareness by showing what might happen in the future. It is important to be cautious about information from the AIS display, as some of it is entered by the operator on the other ship, and so may not be accurate. AIS information can be useful in supporting decisions based on radar and visual information. It's best not to use VHF communication for collision avoidance, even if the target has been identified by AIS. Valuable time can be wasted. When contact has been made, a false sense of security is often generated. Worse still, misunderstandings frequently occur. This all distracts the watchkeeper from the task of following the call regs to avoid collision.
Hello, Captain speaking.
Remember, it's always better to call the master earlier rather than later.
Okay, thank you.
Masters dread arriving on the bridge when it's too late to take effective avoiding action. When the master comes on the bridge, the watchkeeping officer still has the con, until there is a formal verbal exchange, such as the master saying, "I have the con."
What course are you steering at the moment?
256, 90 RPMs on the engine.
Okay, I'll take the con now, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This statement must be absolutely clear. This will be recorded by the voyage data recorder and should also be logged.
Can you call the engine room, please? Telling me the engine on standby.
The watchkeeping officer must remain on the bridge to support the master, not simply doing what they're told, but double-checking things. Masters should share their intended manoeuvring with the bridge team.
Midship the wheel.
Midship.
The watchkeeping officer should question the master if he or she is uneasy with any proposed decision or action. In difficult traffic situations, this type of good teamwork becomes essential. Officers must be aware of the dangers of over-reliance on electronic equipment. Remember to regularly look out the window. Remember to look astern as well as forward. On integrated bridges, equipment can interact and provide the watchkeeper with a false picture. It's important to know your equipment, to understand its settings, and to maintain good situational awareness. Once the danger has clearly passed, and this is confirmed both visually and by the target's track, the watchkeeper must get the ship back safely on its intended track. That's the end of this section. Now, look at the workbook. Bridge watchkeeping means taking the responsibility for the safety of the ship and everyone on board. These responsibilities are set out in the STCW and SOLAS conventions. The voyage plan is the heart of the watchkeeping officer's task. Watchkeepers must ensure that the track made good is as close as possible to the intended track. They must be aware of the hazards marked in the voyage plan and the contingency planning to minimize the risks. The watchkeeping officer must know the ship's situation and how this relates both to fixed hazards and to other nearby ships. This means good situational awareness. This is achieved by maintaining a proper and effective lookout by all available means, including visually, by radar, ECDIS, AIS, by sound and by VHF. Position fixing must be carried out according to the requirements of the voyage plan. Watchkeepers should remember the words of an American admiral. No officer, whatever his rank and experience, should flatter himself that he's immune to the inexplicable lapses of judgment, calculation, and memory, or slips of the tongue in giving orders, which have so often brought disaster to men of the highest reputation and ability. Watchkeeping officers should never delay calling the master to the bridge. They need to regularly check the ship's navigational and other bridge equipment. They need to continually cross-check the information they get from electronic equipment, the charts, and their eyes and ears. The watchkeeping officer has to interpret and assess many types of information, but must remember that keeping the ship out of danger is the most important job on the ship.